Imagine being so dangerous to an empire's memory that killing you isn't enough. Your name is erased. Your statues are smashed. Your image is scraped off stone, as if history itself is trying to pretend you never lived. That was the fate of a Roman emperor named Elagabalus. He became emperor at just 14 years old. 4 years later, he was overthrown by his own soldiers. His reign ended so violently that Rome immediately tried to wipe him from existence. Not because he lost a war. Not because he was weak. But because, to Rome, he had become something far worse. Unacceptable. So what did a teenage emperor do to inspire that level of hatred? Elagabalus shattered Rome's deepest religious and social boundaries. He married Aquilia Severa, one of the Vestal Virgins, the most sacred women in Roman society. Vestals were sworn to lifelong chastity, believed to protect Rome itself by maintaining the sacred flame of the city. Any violation of that vow was considered a disaster for the entire empire. For centuries, no emperor had dared interfere with them. Elagabalus didn't just interfere. He publicly declared the marriage holy and insisted it was divinely ordained. When senators protested, he claimed he wanted their children to be gods. But that was only the beginning. He transformed parts of the imperial palace into spaces that shocked even Rome's famously tolerant elite. He humiliated senators, inverted social hierarchies, and openly mocked traditions that had held the empire together for hundreds of years. He reportedly offered unimaginable rewards to physicians who could change his physical sex, not as a joke, but as a sincere desire tied to his sense of identity and divinity. Most alarming of all, Elagabalus attempted to replace Rome's gods. He brought with him a sacred black stone, a meteorite worshipped in Syria as the embodiment of a sun deity called Elagabal. To him this god was supreme. Roman gods like Jupiter and Mars were demoted, their temples overshadowed. Sacred rituals were rewritten. Foreign priests flooded the capital. Incense filled the Senate so thick it stung the eyes of Rome's ruling class. To the Romans this wasn't reform. It was sacrilege. Yet here's what makes Elagabalus truly disturbing and fascinating. He wasn't acting out of cruelty or malice. He genuinely believed he was right. He believed he was chosen. That his identity, his marriages, his religion were all divine truths. He didn't see himself as breaking rules, because in his mind, there were no rules above him. And that made him impossible to control. For nearly 2,000 years, historians argued over whether his story was exaggerated. Was Elagabalus truly this extreme? Or did Rome invent a perfect monster to justify murdering a teenager they couldn't understand? The ancient sources, Cassius Dio, Herodian, and the Historia Augusta, all confirm the core events, even if some details were dramatized. Enough independent accounts agree on one thing: Rome didn't kill a sadistic tyrant. They killed a boy who believed he was a prophet. So how did someone like this ever become emperor? The answer is one woman, Julia Maesa, his grandmother. She had spent decades inside the imperial court. She knew every general, every secret, every weakness. When the reigning emperor Macrinus exiled her to Syria, she plotted her return. She spread a lie among the legions, that her grandson was the illegitimate son of the beloved former emperor Caracalla. The soldiers believed her. They revolted. Macrinus was killed. And in the year 218, a teenage priest who had never lived in Rome, barely spoke Latin, and had spent his childhood dancing in temple rituals around a meteorite, arrived as emperor of the most powerful empire on earth. Rome expected discipline. What they got was chaos. On his very first night in the palace, Elagabalus hosted a celebration so scandalous that it immediately unsettled the Senate. Still, they told themselves he was young, that he would learn, that Rome had survived wild emperors before. They were wrong. Because soon even his own family realized something terrifying. This emperor could not be guided, restrained, or corrected. And there was one final decision, a single act, that convinced even his grandmother that Elagabalus could not be allowed to rule any longer. That decision sealed his fate. The priests demanded punishment, not debate, not negotiation, execution. A Vestal Virgin had been violated. By Roman law, that was an offense so severe it threatened the safety of the entire empire. The punishment was clear and ancient. Elagabalus refused. He stood before Rome's religious authorities and said something that perfectly captured the danger he represented. I am the high priest of Rome. If I declare something sacred, then it is sacred. That was the moment many realized this was not rebellion. It was delusion. And then just as suddenly he abandoned her. Not because the Senate protested. Not because priests begged him. But because he was bored. He divorced her and married another woman. Then another. Then another. In just 4 years, Elagabalus married 5 times, treating marriage not as a political alliance or sacred bond, but as disposable theater. Rome's most ancient traditions were reduced to props in a private performance. But the marriages were never the point, because what Elagabalus truly wanted was not wives. It was control. It was inversion. It was shock. And what he did next made even the marriage to a Vestal Virgin seem restrained. Elagabalus transformed parts of the imperial palace into something unthinkable. A place designed to resemble the lowest establishments of Rome. But he was not a visitor. According to multiple ancient historians, he presented himself as the attraction. The sources describe a chamber decorated deliberately to mimic common houses of pleasure. Heavy incense, foreign perfumes, drapes and lighting meant to erase the boundary between emperor and outcast. Visitors said the scent lingered on their clothes long after they left the palace. And he demanded payment. Not because he needed money. He ruled the empire. Wealth meant nothing to him. What mattered was the act itself, being chosen, being purchased, being reduced. Roman writers claim he took pride in it, that he kept count, that he boasted, that he even competed with professional workers of the night, treating it like a game, and smiling when he believed he had won. To the Roman elite, this was not just scandal. It was an inversion of the universe. The emperor was supposed to stand above society. Elagabalus dragged the throne into the gutter and dared Rome to look away. Among all the figures in his life, one man stood apart. His name was Hierocles, a slave, a chariot driver, physically powerful, violent. Everything Rome believed an emperor should dominate, not elevate. Elagabalus called him, my husband. He referred to himself as the wife. He showered Hierocles with honors, gold, estates, titles. He seated him beside the throne during official proceedings. Senators, men whose ancestors had conquered nations, were forced to bow to a former slave because the emperor demanded it. Ancient sources describe the relationship as turbulent and humiliating. Elagabalus seemed to equate suffering with affection, submission with identity. He appeared publicly injured at times and showed no shame, only pride. To him this was not weakness. It was transformation. Because Elagabalus did not merely want to behave differently. He wanted to become someone else entirely. The historians write that he offered unimaginable rewards to physicians across the empire. Fortunes, titles, even control of provinces. All for one thing, to be physically remade. This was not metaphorical. He searched obsessively. He believed it was possible. He did not understand, or refused to accept, that the medical knowledge of the 3rd century could not grant what he wanted. When reality failed him, he created a substitute. He reshaped his appearance completely. Daily rituals, elaborate clothing, jewelry, wigs of every color, cosmetics used by Rome's most elite courtesans. He demanded to be addressed not as Dominus, Lord, but as Domina, Lady. When senators resisted, he retaliated. Public humiliation became policy. Officials were forced into performances meant to strip them of dignity. Meetings of state blurred into spectacles of control. Power was no longer exercised through law, but through psychological domination. And while Rome struggled to understand his identity, Elagabalus turned his attention to something even more dangerous than social norms: religion. Because Elagabalus was not just emperor. He was a priest. From childhood, he had served the god Elagabal, a solar deity worshipped in Syria. His god was not a statue but a black stone, believed to have fallen from the heavens. To him it was divine beyond question. And now, as emperor, he intended to elevate it above all others. He constructed an enormous temple on the Palatine Hill, one of the most sacred locations in Rome. At its center he placed the black stone. Then he issued an order that terrified Rome's priesthood. All sacred objects were to be brought there. The fire of Vesta, the shields of Mars, the Palladium, the relic said to protect Rome since the age of Troy. Everything. He arranged them around the stone as offerings, not equals. As if Rome's gods themselves were subordinate. To Roman belief, this was catastrophic. Rome existed because the gods favored it. If the gods were displaced, Rome would fall. Elagabalus went further. He staged divine marriages for his god. First to Minerva, then to a foreign lunar goddess. Each union celebrated with extravagant ceremonies, sacrifices, and processions through the city. The black stone rode in a golden chariot, pulled by white horses, while the Senate was forced to kneel before it. Men who once ruled the known world knelt before a rock because refusing meant death. At that moment, Rome understood something chilling. This emperor did not rule Rome. He was replacing it. If anyone still resisted, Elagabalus made one thing clear: obedience was survival. Those who refused were threatened, removed, or destroyed. Fear kept Rome silent. And if you are still watching at this point, you might be asking a very reasonable question. How did Rome allow this to continue for 4 years? That question leads us to the darkest part of the story. The moment when Rome finally understood this emperor could not be corrected, restrained, or outgrown. The act that sealed his fate. Because when Elagabalus was not consumed by religion or identity, he was fascinated by violence. But not ordinary violence. To him, violence was performance. A spectacle. Something to be enjoyed. He hosted elaborate banquets for senators and nobles. Lavish halls. Music. Entertainment. Everything expected of imperial hospitality. And then, without warning, the night would change. Sometimes dangerous animals were released into the hall, causing chaos and panic among guests who had come expecting luxury, not terror. Other times, executions were ordered mid-feast, treated as amusement rather than justice. But one banquet became infamous above all others. The Banquet of the Roses. Elagabalus decorated the ceiling with enormous nets filled with rose petals. Thousands upon thousands of them. The room was beautiful, fragrant, almost dreamlike. Halfway through the meal he gave the signal. The nets were cut. Petals fell. And kept falling. At first, guests laughed, thinking it was a clever display. But the petals did not stop. The piles grew higher. The room filled. Panic replaced delight as people struggled to move. Some could not escape. Ancient historians describe confusion, fear, and silence as the petals buried parts of the room. Elagabalus watched from above, amused by what he had created. That night became legendary. And that was the moment his own grandmother, Julia Misa, finally accepted the truth. This was not immaturity. This was not youth. This was not something time would fix. If Rome was going to survive, Elagabalus had to die. By the year 221, the empire was exhausted. But killing an emperor was not simple. He still commanded loyalty within the Praetorian Guard. Direct action would mean civil war. So Julia Misa chose another path. She had another grandson, Alexander Severus. He was younger, quiet, respectful. Everything Elagabalus was not. Slowly, carefully, she began presenting Alexander as the future of Rome. A safer choice. A Roman choice. The message spread. Elagabalus noticed. He panicked. He attempted to eliminate his cousin more than once, but the Praetorian Guard intervened. Their loyalty had shifted. Rome had chosen. In March of the year 222, the decision was made. The guards surrounded the palace. When Elagabalus heard the sound of armored boots echoing through marble halls, he understood immediately. This was not a warning. This was the end. He fled, not to his throne, not to loyal supporters, but to the palace latrines, trying to hide where no emperor should ever be found. He was discovered quickly, dragged out, stripped of power in seconds. He begged, promised rewards, offered titles. None of it mattered anymore. His mother ran to him, shielding him with her own body. She was killed first, and then Elagabalus. But Rome was not finished. His body was stripped of imperial identity, removed of all symbols of power, and dragged through the streets of the city he had ruled. Citizens watched in silence or anger as the former emperor passed through the same roads where he once claimed divine authority. Finally, his remains were thrown into Rome's great sewer, the Cloaca Maxima, where waste and refuse were carried away from the city. That was his end. No tomb, no honors, no remembrance. The Senate followed with a decree known as Damnatio Memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Statues destroyed, names erased from monuments, coins melted down. Rome tried to pretend he had never existed. And yet here we are. 1800 years later, historians still argue. Was Elagabalus a monster? Or was he a child? He was 14 years old when he became emperor. 14. An age when most people cannot be trusted with responsibility, yet Rome handed him absolute power. He had not been raised to rule, not educated as a Roman, not trained in politics or war. He had been raised as a priest. Then suddenly he could do anything, and no one could stop him. The truth is uncomfortable. He committed unforgivable acts. And he was also deeply unprepared, isolated, and consumed by beliefs no one around him shared. Rome destroyed him because it did not know how to contain him. They erased his name. But they failed. Because you can destroy a body. You can erase stone and metal. But you cannot erase a story. The boy Rome tried to forget became the emperor history remembers. And that is Elagabalus' final legacy.